Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for always being faithful to our program. This is the debate on this special Monday where we'll be talking about colonialism. I remain your humble host, Molifo Elvis Ambi, and today with me in the studio, we're going to have somebody very special visiting our platform for the very first time, and I hope he is coming to stay. And that is none other than Dr. Phanuel Kaapama, who will be taking us through an hour talk, exchange on colonialism. And I would like to know that the topic for today on the debate is Africa after colonialism, that is post colonialism. And we know that African countries have not been able, even after getting independence, to disentangle themselves from colonial overlords because of the systematic disarticulation in indigenous economy and colonial perfect rule for the states. And for Africa to untangle themselves from these social, economic, political, health, education rules, there is an urgent need to create their own identity, culture, technology, economy, education, religion, craft that will interwoven in good governance. In short, Africans have to take everything into their hands so that they can untangle themselves from the colonial entanglement or that they are in, permit me that tautology, so that by 2063, Africa will actually be the type of Africa that we will write home about, and that the youths who are there today will know that we did our own quarter to make Africa the best. Ladies and gentlemen, join me this evening to welcome into our studio the Sompon Global TV, Dr. Phanuel Kaapama, who will have about 20 minutes or so to present his submission. And then we are going to take questions from you who are watching us always live on YouTube and on Facebook, and other questions that we may develop or create from what he will present in order to make people, you who of course who are listening to us, to understand properly. Doctor, you are welcome to our platform. This is your platform. Feel at home. We are happy that you're there, and we want to thank you for the gift of your time. As we said already, it is not always easy to get you from your very busy schedule to be with us here on this studio. You're welcome, Doctor. You may present yourself properly because your qualifications and your activities are so many that I don't want to get into shoes areas that I will not be able to do. So you just introduce yourself briefly, then I will usher you into your presentation, Doctor. You're welcome once again to the Sompon Global TV.
Yes, thank you very much, Elvis, for the opportunity of tonight, as well as for, in the first place, giving me the invitation to share your prestigious platform. Now, I would go for a very simple introduction tonight. My name is Phanuel Kaapama. I'm with the University of Namibia, where I teach, research, and closely observe politics of development, especially in Namibia, Africa, and the world at large.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Brief introduction there. You teach politics of development, and that is a sphere that we actually need to politicize what we do, to make it known to people, and so that through that we can develop our own Africa. Thank you so much. You have 20 minutes or so to present the work that you have done on PowerPoint, so that after that we can now share an exchange, of course, with our viewers and clarify some points that will be coming up in your presentation. You have the floor, Doctor. You have 20 minutes or so to go through your work. You're welcome again to the Sompon Global TV.
Yes. Now, thank you very much, Elvis. The way I decided to approach this topic, it's a very broad topic. So, like say, for instance, if one looks at the complexity of the topic, one would first of all have to acknowledge that you are talking, or I'm expected to address the topic of Africa after colonialism. Now, the African colonial and post-colonial experience has never been monolithic. So, and that is because Africa have a very diverse socio-political histories. And like say, for instance, if one takes the African post-colonial experience, technically one can argue that it spends the period from when Liberia declared independence on July 26, 1847, because Liberia is on the African continent. So when you talk of the post-African experience, post-colonial African experience, you may start from there. Or even with the victory of Ethiopia over Italy in the Battle of Adwa, that made Ethiopia the only territory on Africa to escape colonial rule, besides the temporary occupation in the 1930s. Or one could also talk, say for instance, from the perspective or experience of when Ghana gained independence on March 6, 1957, almost 64 years ago. So, and why I'm bringing this point is to illustrate. And by the time in the 60s, in the 90s, there were still African territories that were not beyond the yoke of colonial rule. Namibia got independence in 1990. South Africa only, black South Africans could only talk of independence around about 1994. So the period is all over. So it's not like you put your mark on, let's say, 1957, the year that Ghana got independence, and you declare it's from there onwards, because you would leave part of the history behind and also part of the history in front. Now, also the African colonial experience, it's characterized by varied colonial legacies, British indirect colonial rule model, the French Republican colonial model that was premised on political integration and administrative assimilation, the Portuguese colonial corporatist model, or even the Belgian wholly paternalistic colonial model. So, and immediately after independence, these different models, plus many other social dynamics, have had a lot of impact on how independence was achieved. So, then making the whole experience, not only for the first few months, but perhaps even years, having an impact on how how the post-colonial state emerged and how it consolidated itself, the challenges and many other issues that they faced. So now, in addressing this specific topic tonight, I would not go and try and focus on the smaller differences or try and draw artificial similarities between the various African post-colonial experiences. But let me start with Agenda 2063.
Good.
Yes, why I'm starting there, it's one of those issues that are current presently, and that's where one discussing or providing a blueprint or a master plan for the repositioning of Africa into a global power to be reckoned with. So it's something for the future. But when I discuss the African post-colonial experience, and I look at that vision or the master plan, I start by asking myself the question of uh, is there anything new from what we are saying now as our vision going forward, from the vision that Guruma and others had when they established the Organization of African Unity? Now, most of the philosophies, the ideological outlook, the rhetoric, and so on is the same. Like I gave a description of what Agenda 2063 wants to achieve, and that is to reposition Africa into a global power. But what did others who established the Organization of African Unity? I take a quote here from President Kwame Nkrumah, who indicated that it is clear that we must find an African solution to our problem, and that this can only be found in African unity. Divided we are weak. United Africa could become one of the greatest forces of good in the world. Now, you look at the vision that Nkrumah had when he made that statement, to the vision that Africa, through the African Union today, is projecting. It's not worlds apart. It's almost a similar vision, but talking from where we are informed by the experience, the challenges, the tribulations, the pitfalls through which the African leaders, African nations, African people had to walk immediately from the time of when they attained independence to where we are today. So all those experiences are important, and I think that's how I would want to reflect on the African post-colonial experience. And there are quite a lot of topics from the economy to one-party state to presidents for life to failed the concept of the failed state where states fail to deliver goods and the broken social contracts, and there are quite a lot of topics that one can address. And especially many of these issues, African leaders in the past, they try to also say a few words, project their visions on how they should be addressed. Some of the issues that became pitfalls were defended by African leaders. Some of the issues that Africa would want to build on from now into the future were also set and promoted by African leaders in the past. So it's a question of more seeing what is it that we can consider to be a positive experience that we can use in order to build the future. And my argument is that it's not all gloom or doom when one is looking at the African experience. There are very positive lessons. There are very positive ideologies that can be repackaged in order to take Africa forward. But then we have, as Africans, we also need to be sincere and acknowledge where we have failed in the past, because failing to do so, we would run into the same pitfalls. So I would start with that very short introduction, and then I'm all yours to interrogate me in a brotherly manner.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for that wonderful submission. You're a working encyclopedia as far as African history is concerned, colonialism that we are talking on this evening. When I listened to you and I got the very quote of His Excellency Kwame Nkrumah, that I have got to listen, sometimes even a homage being paid to him by Professor Lumumba, and I quote, it is clear that we must find an African solution to our problems, and this can only be found in African unity. I'll talk about post-colonization. We talk about independence of many African countries, and you said that the independence came not just at once, but we already heard His Excellency Kwame Nkrumah crying that only us Africans can be able to sort our problems or solutions to our problems. Doctor, I wish to inquire whether this actually was taken seriously into consideration, because when you look at how Africa still evolved today, it's like the things were seen, the problems were shortlisted already, solutions equally could be found easily, but we Africans derailed from this, because this statement by Kwame Nkrumah is very it's heavy. It speaks for itself, because that is the problem all of African countries are facing. Talking of independence, but we still look like we are very dependent. What can you say? Was this statement by Kwame Nkrumah taken really into consideration by other African head of states when they actually sat together to seek African unity?
Yes, no, thank you very much on that question. Gruma's vision can also be captured in one of his other famous quotes: "Seek ye first the political kingdom, and all else shall be added unto you." So his outlook was more on trying to unify Africa politically, because he had the belief that if Africa is united under a United States of Africa, it would become a force to be reckoned with, the force for good that he talked about. Uh, when he made his submission, uh, African leaders never rejected African unity, but there were many or others who had a different formula or strategy on how that unity should be achieved. So if you go into the African history, that's where you would come across the Casablanca group that Nkrumah himself was associated for, that believed on the need to move towards a more solid form of a union. But then you also had the Monrovia group that believed in the preservation of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the emerging post-colonial African state. And of course, you would know who then prevailed in the end. Nkrumah and his group did not carry the day. And the Organization of African Unity ended up being structured the way it was structured. When it was like that, we have seen Africa at war with itself, African countries, African brothers fighting each other. We have also seen Africa within countries fighting one another for various reasons, religion, ethnicity, ideological outlook. We have seen the meddling of the Cold War into African politics. We have even seen the blatant abuse of power and state machinery, which agitated people to rise and try and topple their own leaders and government. So that's the broader African experience. Whereas Africa was talking of African unity, Africa was also at the same time at war with itself. There were African leaders who would host Africans OAU summits and talk about African unity and the need to do everything in the name and on behalf of our people. But at the same time, they would be imprisoning and even perhaps torture and killing their own countrymen just because they have a different view. So that is the Africa that we have seen. Now today, I made reference to the Agenda 2063,
Yeah.
and you would notice that uh, although the agenda is talking about African unity, it is talking more about uh, continental economic integration, more about regional integration. So here, the seeking first of the political kingdom and for everything else to follow seems not to be the route that African leaders have strongly decided to pursue.
Yeah, thank you, Doctor. Let me come in there because you just mentioned the very next question I wanted to pose. You said that to achieve Agendas 2063, we must reposition Africa through a global power. What do you mean when you make this statement?
Yes, basically, Africa can become a force. Africa have natural resources. Africa has the population, the numbers. Africa also have human resources that you would find already polished in other parts of the world. If you go into the African streets, you may come across boys that are walking barefoot, and you would look at them and think they are poor, but many of them, one could look at them as unpolished diamonds if provided with the right opportunities and support, they can shine. So, with that capacity, Africa can become a force.
Okay. With that
When
capacity, Africa.
united,
Mhm. Yeah.
when
You
united,
say, yeah, you say when united, Africa can actually become a force. But then we see after so many years of independence of most African countries, we still, with the abundant natural resources that we have, that is a fact, we still very much depend on manufactured products and we do not process our own products. Doctor, what actually went wrong? Or what has gone wrong that after independence we still are so dependent?
yes. Now, also, one would have to look at it was not only Africa that was colonized. Asia also went through the same colonization. And in Asia, we have seen powers emerging. That's why when you talk of the newly industrializing countries, you would find them there. When you talk of emerging global powers, you would see quite a number of Asian countries being mentioned. If one takes an example of Ghana, I read somewhere that at independence, when you look at their natural resource, their human resource capacity, and so on, many people believed that Ghana had better prospects of developing faster compared to Malaysia. Round
Thank you.
about
Thank you.
60 years, 70 years down the line, the African potential has not been realized. And I think that has to do with the policies we pursued, that has to do with the way we conducted our politics. So also, many people would want to point to external causes, and I would argue that the causes of the African demise is both external and internal. And since I can control what is internal, that's what we
Mhm.
should talk more about, realizing our internal potential in order to withstand the external threats.
Okay, I was just going through some of the very long-serving presidents, African presidents, and I have this quote that you have here on your presentation by Nelson Mandela. That was 2018 to 2013. He says, when a man has done what he considers to be his duty to his people and his country, he can rest in peace. When a man has done what he considers, that is slide 16, when a man has done what he considers to be his duty to his people and his country, he can rest in peace. But now we have a controversy because Nelson Mandela ruled just for one term and personally said that his was okay and he stepped down. Do you think that colonization has something to do with this clinging of power or in power by most African leaders?
Yes, I think not colonization to a larger extent. Uh, many, because if you look even at the first years of independence, we used to arguments of tradition, the politics or the traditional politics of a household. You are a father, you are a head of the house. You remain there until the ancestors comes to collect you. You are never recalled. The chief in the village, and so on. So we took tradition because perhaps it served our interest and put it and integrated it into the modern post-colonial state. And as you rightly pointed out, what Mandela has said, you can rest in peace. And I believe resting in peace is better than clinging into power without any peace, because that's what it creates in quite a number of African countries. And if you look at the number of years also, what amuses me of those African leaders that have clinged to power, they were seeing that their countries were crumbling around them, meaning that their oversight and governance was not delivering the goods to the people, but still they wanted to remain. And I would say credit should also be given to the likes of Julius Nyerere, because even before Mandela, of course, he stayed for a number of years, but there came a time that he said that I have come so far, let others bring their ideas and try and resolve the problems of Tanzania. So there are those visionary leaders, and one cannot generalize that it's all African leaders. But of course, if I have to use my fingers to count leaders who ruled for more than 30 years, I would use all my 10 fingers and hope that I had fingers on my feet as well so that I can use it.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll take a 15 seconds jingle, then we'll come back for the next session. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you and welcome back. Today, our topic on the debate is Africa after colonization. So we're talking about post-colonization. And today with me in the studio is Dr. Phanuel Kaapama, who is a historian, of course, and he's very, very seated in what he is delivering to us today, a researcher, and he is into politics of development. Doctor, we have gone already to see what happened after post-colonization, but I wanted to ask you what motivated the foreign countries to colonize Africa? What was their motivation?
Yes, no, thank you very much. Now, many people talk of the industrial revolution of the 19th century, mainly in the context of Europe. And to them, Europe had geniuses who transform many of the European countries. But I think there came a time that there were so many problems with the Industrial Revolution in Europe, and the need for resources, natural resources, which Europe needed in order to develop, that it didn't have. Europe had, through the Industrial Revolution and the emergence of large-scale.
Doctor, 1 second before you continue. Can you reposition your camera well? We are losing your face there. Most of the
Okay.
students who are listening to you very keenly may not be able to know that you're the one, and they are following you really in the background.
Okay.
Yeah, that is much
No, thank
better.
you
Thank
very
you
much.
so much. Mhm.
Yes. No, thank you very much for that reminder. So the process, the emergence of big towns, the emergence of large-scale agricultural production and so on, there were also quite a lot of displacement, a lot of poverty. And as a result of that, Europe also needed to find land and space to move some of their population and give them an opportunity to go and start afresh. Because the Industrial Revolution has not delivered on its promise. So on that basis, these were some of the issues that promoted, and of course, in order to justify an injustice, the argument of civilizing missions and so on was used. But I think besides the economic consideration, the other so-called self-righteous humanitarian considerations, such as that of civilizing the African, was more of a smokescreen.
Okay,
To
Doctor,
justify.
you see that. Thank you very much. You see that the European countries actually colonize many African countries, let me put it that way, and they spend quite some time in Africa. Is there any legacy that they actually left behind that today we can sit behind and say that thank God they actually came to Africa? Can we say that without a heavy heart that thank God for our colonizers who actually came and colonized us?
Yes, no, thank you very much. One of the issues that you would very often hear from those who are justifying the colonization of Africa, you would hear arguments of civilization. But if you go into the history of Africa, Africa had its own experience of civilization that Africa could have talked about had it not been disturbed. If you say, for instance, take the example of the Zimbabwe civilization, if you take many other examples, and there are many. So the process of colonialism derailed the African path to its own civilization and imposed Western civilization. So many people will talk of education and many others, but forgetting that if you go into the history of Timbuktu, for instance, it had one of the biggest universities and libraries before there were even libraries in Europe. So yes, and I think it's not only colonization. If you also look at the history of slave trade, which preceded colonialism, already African civilization the African way of doing things was already disrupted from that time on. The introduction of the Western weapons of war and many other issues had quite a lot of a big disruptive effect on Africa. Yes, being here where we are today, we may say we get independence, but we would not move back because life have moved on.
Thank you. We
But
cannot move back because life actually has to move on. Doctor, tell me, how do Africans who are in the diaspora in their colonizers' country, can you give me an overview of how they actually feel when they are there with everything that goes on so well, infrastructure well developed, and they just have to picture how their country looks back home? How do they feel? Or
yeah,
how can they feel that way?
thank you very much for that one. It's a very good question. We have seen quite a lot of Africans who crossed over to the countries of their former colonizers in order to go and look for a livelihood, where they may think there are better opportunities, where the infrastructure and many other things would be better. Of course, in the first place, the colonizers plundered African resources. It is with those resources that the good infrastructure in the former colonial powers was built. So, and the movement of people also have not been one-dimensional. So there are many Europeans who also have moved in the opposite direction to go and live in that environment where there is no infrastructure. So yes, we are talking about globalization, the free movement of goods and people. But I think what I found amusing is that in many African countries, in many European countries that previously colonized Africa, Africans are not so welcome. But what amuses me is the extent to which those who don't welcome Africans, the people, are eager to welcome African resources. African timber, African gold, African diamond, African petroleum, and so on. Yes, I think I don't blame or question the loyalty of those Africans who are in the diaspora. They have the right to go anywhere. There are quite a number of African countries where the remittance of those that are in the diaspora are doing good for funerals, for educating the young ones, for in many other ways, caring for the elderly and so on. So the same way you have Europeans that come and look for opportunities here, I don't think we should blame or question the loyalty of those Africans that look for opportunities there. After all, Europe was developed and is still developing and flourishing with African resources. So if Africans follow their resources, they have all the right to do so.
Okay, thank you so much for that submission. Many countries that colonize Africa love their resources, but they do not love the Africans when they have to come to their country. Quite something very paradoxical there, like somebody loving the child and hating the mother. And now, with Agenda 2063, the women are not left out. And I want to think that all these aspirations that were put down, all the interest of this Agenda 2063 had been said and seen long ago. Because here I read here from Thomas Sankara, he says, "Comrades, there is no true social revolution without the liberation of women. May my eyes never see and my feet never take me to a society where half the people are held in silence. I hear the roar of women's silence. I sense the rumble of their storm, and I feel the fury of their revolt. That is slide 18 from your presentation. Doctor, this agenda puts women at the center, even, and the girl child at the center of its realization. And we have here Thomas Sankara, who says there is no true social revolution without the liberation of women. What have you to say with this powerful submission that was done years ago, decades ago, and it was already visualizing an Africa and a better Africa that we will want to have and to leave behind for our children?
Yes, now I think that again speaks to one of the issues that I alluded to. When one looks at Agenda 2063, many people who have not really taken time to look into the history of Africa, especially the African post-colonial experience, they would feel that Africa is doing something very unique that Africa has not done before. And that quotation from Thomas Sangara, it's a confirmation that the agenda that Africa is currently pursuing with regard to women empowerment is building on a vision that has been there, that was promoted by Thomas Sankara. If you also look at Nyerere and others, there is a lot of evidence that would attest to what they have done. And even in Africa, in the pre-colonial context, you would come across names of very powerful African rulers and warriors. So the African women have been part of the African civilization, has been part of the African struggle for liberation from colonial rule, and would be part and cannot be excluded in the transformation that Agenda 2063 is trying to promote.
Doctor,
And also when you look at quite a number of African parliament, a few years back when I checked, countries like Rwanda, countries like Mozambique, countries like South Africa, countries like Namibia, they were doing very well in terms of women representation, even much better than the United States and some other powers that we normally associate with democracy and equality.
Okay. Thank you very much, Doctor. We are talking about post-colonization. We have equally this issue of brain drain. Africans who go to European countries study and they do not come back. Do you think that is a new form of colonization coming
Uh,
after colonization, of course?
yes. Now, I think it's part of the challenge. African countries with their limited resources try to give opportunity for their best minds. And once those minds go and explore the world and see opportunities, they settle rather than return. Now, as they say, it takes two to tango. And my challenge would be on the African governments to try and do more and create opportunities for their best minds to return home. And of course, those Africans that get an opportunity to come home should also be encouraged to return home and make their contribution on the continent. So yes, I would agree with that concern And I think there are countries that are also waging a deliberate and well-targeted campaign to retain and attract African skills without really even coming forward to compensate Africa for the investments that they have made. So the African human resource is for free. But what resources does Africa get from those that benefit from African human resource for free? So Africa gives for free, but it doesn't get for free. And I think when we talk of human resources here also, I would indicate that many people think of very sophisticated human resources. But even just take the simple game of football. How many African stars are shining and have brought light into football leagues in many parts of Europe? Take a country such as Ivory Coast, I think they can put up to 4 or 5 teams that can compete even in the English Premier League. But you hear, and they have built the name of European teams. They are able to sell, and they are known. But many of those who know those African Drogba and others, if you ask them, give me one name of a football team from the Ivory Coast, they would not be able to tell you. The other year, when the World Cup was in South Africa, I had an argument in my class because I asked how many African teams are at the World Cup, and the students were telling me 5. I tell them, okay, go home tomorrow, go and count in the evening. Tomorrow, come and tell me. I asked them how many African teams the next day. They say 5, and I say no, there are 6, because France was an African team. It was not an African country. It was not an African nation, but their team at the World Cup was an African team. So resources comes in many forms, and it's not only the skilled resources. If those Africans who are playing football were on Africa continent, and African football was well organized, I think we would have been selling better television rights, better than the English teams, I think.
Okay, thank you very much. I wish to ask you, Doctor, you follow up history very closely, and we are talking about post-colonialism. What or how has independence impacted African countries after colonialism? That is, during this period of post-colonialism, what developmental aspects can you really palpate in most African countries that is coming because of liberation from their colonial masters?
Yes, no, thank you very much. If you look at especially the first few years of African independence before the what some development scholars called the lost decade of the 1980s. If you look at how a number of African countries, you can mention Nigeria, you can mention Kenya, you can Zimbabwe, Zambia, Malawi, have invested in their human resource, eliminating illiteracy, for instance, and creating opportunities for their youth, education opportunities. So if you look at what African countries did immediately, especially in the 60s and 70s, in terms of promoting accessible and universal education in quite a number of countries. Those were major achievements. And then, of course, with many other problems that came towards the late 1970s, civil wars and so on, many of these achievements started being rolled back. I just mentioned one. If you look at agricultural production, Africa has produced a lot. If you look at African mineral resources that have gone out of Africa and develop other parts where our leaders has failed. The opportunities were there, they created them, but they allow others to eat in their house and were left with the bones, or nothing to eat or to feed their own children. So that part of irresponsible parenting where Africa has not positioned itself very well. So those are some of the lessons, the pitfalls that I talked about. That we should have learned from. And if we have to promote Agenda 2063, we should not repeat them willfully.
Okay, I was saying that I want to relate with Eno Magiroy, who talks about, who says that we need to be united in order to achieve all our goals. And what just came to my mind was this issue of multi-partyism in most African countries. What is your take about this? Is this really unity after suffering so much from our colonial masters? We have heard Kwame Nkrumah talk about us seeking our own solutions to our own problems, and then we still have to have so many political parties, and at the end of the day, the ideas are so diverse, and nobody can really work for her people because anybody is trying to oppose the other. What do you think? What is the impact of these multi parties in our African countries today?
Yes, now one of the pitfalls of the post-colonial era, the pitfalls of the post-colonial African experience, I would mention the mentality or of one party state political dispensation. It has created a lot of room for abuse of power. It eliminated choices. It constrained ideas which could have benefited Africa to develop. So multi-party democracy create a platform for choices, for the free flow of ideas. But I think the way we are interpreting it in Africa is where we have to change our mindset. And that's where Africans see multi-party democracy as an end in itself. It should be a means to something. It should be a means to better service delivery. It should be a means to create opportunities for our people to participate in the processes of their own development. But I think the challenges has been, to many Africans, it's an end in itself. To many Africans, when we hear the concept of an opposition party, then we take it as opposing for the sake of opposing. So those are some of the problems that we have. But I would argue that there would be no alternative to responsible multi-party politics, to patriotic multi-party politics. One party state political dispensation is not a solution. It has done a lot of harm to Africa.
Okay,
I
something just
included
came up.
I included a quote there by President His Excellency Kenneth Kaunda, where he indicated that it would have been disastrous for Zambia if we had gone the multi-party, because these parties would have been used by those opposed to Zambian participation in the freedom struggle. But if you take round about how many years from 1963 to round about the early 90s, almost 30 years of multi-party of one-party rule in Zambia, I would argue it has done a lot of harm. Maybe His Excellency did not see it that way, but Zambia was brought into a state that it has taken years for it to recover.
Okay, we can see that most African countries, if they must develop, or if they have developed, it is when the presidents or the heads of states or the stakeholders in that country actually take things into their hands and do not follow so much influence from external, coming from external sources, and their countries actually get developed. Time is always getting so short, Doctor. One
Mm.
last word before we conclude the program about post-colonialism. What is your take? What is your feeling? What impact do you think it has done for Africa? What would have been done better for it to really benefit us as we are looking forward to achieving Agenda 2063?
Yes, no, thank you very much. Africa have been free and enjoyed independence, quite a number of countries for a number of years. And not we have not achieved all our aspirations during that time. But what we have a wealth of experience of our failures, of the pitfalls that we have worked in, of things that have worked better. And that is the best classroom that Africa can start from. What has worked, what has not worked, and where we need to draw lessons from others. That should be the next step, but not the primary step. So, in this month, when we are celebrating the efforts of African leaders to promote African unity and position and reposition Africa to become a better global player, we would have to learn a lot from the stages that Africa has gone through, from pre-colonial to colonial to where we are now, the post-colonial experiences, and those are very valuable and rich lessons that we can draw from, and that's why programs like this one are important. And I congratulate you and wish you a very productive weeks ahead as part of your programming.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that powerful word. Like you concluded the program already, we are happy for your time that you have spent with us. We're hoping equally that we will still get you sometime on our program so that together we can deliver our own quarter to see that this agenda is actually achieved. It's always a wonderful pleasure having you when you come. You share your experiences with us, with our youths, and of course, they are motivated and we together are domesticating this Agenda 2063. Our topic for today was Africa after colonization, and we will be having other interesting topics that will be coming up in our subsequent editions. Thank you very much, Doctor, for having shared your time with us. Thank you for having been part of our platform, and thank you for being part of the team that is sending out this message of Agenda 2063 to our youth and making them equally come closer to grasp this agenda because it is shaped, cut for Africans and by Africans for us. Thank you very much. It's been a wonderful evening with you. Hoping to see you again some other time. Bye bye.
Thank you very much.